My parents uninvited me from their anniversary gala because I wasn't elite enough. I spent the night alone, but while they toasted their image, the news broke. My brother called, panicking, as every guest realized the tech billionaire they idolized was the daughter they'd just rejected. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. I was sitting on the floor of my studio apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the smell of stale coffee, when my phone buzzed against the hardwood. It was a violent sound in the quiet room, startling me enough that I dropped the roll of packing tape I had been holding. My hands were already shaking, a symptom of the exhaustion that had plagued me for the last 6 months, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from sleeping 4 hours a night and living on adrenaline. I wiped my palms on my oversized, stained sweatshirt and reached for the device. The screen lit up with a notification from Mother. My stomach did that familiar, sickening flip it always did when she contacted me. We were 3 days away from their 30th wedding anniversary. The Pearl Jubilee, as my mother, Sylvia, had been calling it for the last 2 years. It was going to be the social event of the season for our mid-sized city's upper crust. They had rented out the grand ballroom at the Historical Society, hired a string quartet, and invited everyone who was anyone: politicians, old money families, and the new wave of venture capitalists my father, Richard, was desperate to impress. I had spent the last week agonizing over what to wear. I had even scraped together enough money from my freelance checking account, the one they knew about, to buy a dress that didn't look like it came from a thrift store, though it had. I wanted to be there. Despite everything, despite the years of subtle digs and overt exclusions, I still had that pathetic, childlike desire to see them happy and to be part of that happiness. I unlocked the phone. The message was long, too long for a simple check-in. "Elena," it began, no greeting, no warmth. "Your father and I have been discussing the seating arrangements for Saturday. It has become incredibly complicated. We have received last-minute RSVPs from the oblivious influential partners at the firm and the vice mayor. Space is at an absolute premium." I held my breath, reading the words but struggling to process the implication. To be blunt, this is a high society event. The guest list is curated for professional networking and image. We feel that you would be incredibly uncomfortable in this setting. You don't know anyone, and quite frankly, your current lifestyle and presentation would be difficult to explain to our investors. We think it is best if you do not attend. We can do a private dinner next week at the house. Just family. It will be less pressure for you. I read it again, and then a third time. Only high society guests will be there. That was the subtext screaming between the lines. I didn't drop the phone. I placed it very gently on the floor next to me, as if it were made of glass. The silence in my apartment suddenly felt deafening. It wasn't just a rejection, it was an erasure. They weren't just saying they didn't want me there, they were saying I was a liability, a stain on the pristine white tablecloth of their lives. I looked around my apartment. It was small, yes. Cluttered, definitely. To them, it looked like the den of a woman who had failed to launch. A 29-year-old copy editor scraping by, living in a questionable neighborhood, wearing clothes that were 3 seasons out of date. They saw the boxes and assumed I was being evicted or moving to something even smaller. They didn't know what was actually in the boxes. They didn't know that the presentation they were so ashamed of was a carefully constructed armor I had worn to protect the one thing they couldn't touch. I pulled my knees to my chest, feeling the cold seep through my leggings. The physical illness I had been fighting, the nausea of stress, the dizziness of high-stakes negotiation, suddenly spiked. I gagged, dry heaving into my hands. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room, my voice cracked, brittle and dry. "Okay." It wasn't okay. It was devastating. But as the shock began to recede, it was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They wanted to protect their image. They wanted to ensure their investors were impressed. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Saturday, the same day the embargo lifted. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis of failure they had given me years ago. It was the final confirmation that their love was entirely conditional on my net worth. The tears didn't come immediately. For the first hour, I just sat there, paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of it. I imagined them sitting in their solarium, that glass-walled room filled with exotic plants my mother barely knew how to care for, drafting that text. I could see my father, Richard, swirling his scotch, nodding as my mother typed. "It's for her own good," he would say. "She'd just stand in the corner looking like a lost puppy. It's embarrassing for everyone." "Exactly," Sylvia would agree, hitting send without a second thought. "We can give her a check next week. That's what she really needs anyway." I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked to the kitchenette. I poured a glass of tap water and drank it down, trying to wash away the sour taste in my mouth. My reflection in the window was ghostly, pale skin, dark circles under my eyes, hair tied up in a messy bun. I looked like a wreck. I looked exactly like the daughter they were ashamed of. I picked up the phone again. I needed to reply. If I didn't, they would call, feigning concern, pushing the narrative that they were doing me a favor. "Understood," I typed. "I wouldn't want to be a distraction. Have a wonderful anniversary." I sent it before I could change my mind. It was passive. It was weak. It was exactly what they expected from Alina, the doormat. Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared. "Thank you for being reasonable, darling. We knew you'd understand. We'll send you photos." Photos? They would send me photos of the party. I wasn't good enough to attend. I threw the phone onto the couch and walked over to the desk that dominated the corner of the room. It was a cheap particle board desk I'd bought secondhand 5 years ago, currently covered in 3 monitors, a tangle of cables, and a stack of legal documents thick enough to stop a bullet. I sat down and ran my hand over the top document. The paper was heavy, expensive bond. The header was embossed in silver ink, acquisition agreement, Lumina Technologies and the Apex Group. My parents thought I was a freelance copy editor. They thought I spent my days correcting grammar for college essays and obscure blogs. They didn't know that Lumina, the encrypted data compression algorithm that was currently revolutionizing how streaming services handled 8K video, was written on this very desk. They didn't know that Evie Vance, the elusive founder and CEO who had refused all video interviews and only communicated via encrypted email, was their daughter, Alina Vance. I flipped to the final page. My signature was already there, the ink dry. Next to it was the counter-signature of the CEO of Apex Group, and below that, the purchase price. It was a number with 9 zeros. I traced the zeros with my finger. $1,200,000,000. My parents were worried about their mortgage. They were worried about the lease on my father's luxury sedan. They were worried that my presence would spook investors who might put $50,000 into my father's faltering consultancy firm. If I had gone to that party, if I had walked in wearing my thrift store dress, I would have been the wealthiest person in the room by a factor of 10. But they had forgotten one crucial thing, I whispered, the anger finally beginning to heat the blood in my veins. They forgot to ask me what I've been doing for the last 5 years. I looked at the date on the contract. The acquisition was set to be announced publicly at 6:00 p.m. on Saturday, the exact time their party started. I wasn't going to go. I would respect their wishes. I would stay alone in my apartment. But they had no idea that while they were trying to hide me, the rest of the world was about to come looking for me. To understand why this text message broke me, you have to understand the ecosystem of the Vance family. I wasn't always the black sheep. When I was a child, I was the quiet one. My brother Lucas was 3 years older and the undisputed son around which my parents orbited. Lucas was loud, athletic, and charming in that superficial way that adults love. He got the varsity jacket, I got the library card. He got the private tutors for his C- math grades, I got told to figure it out when I wanted to learn coding. It wasn't that they were abusive in the traditional sense. They were just indifferent. They saw children as accessories to their own status. Lucas, with his football trophies and later his job at a mid-tier investment bank, fit the aesthetic. He looked good in the family Christmas card. Me, I was awkward. I liked computers. I liked silence. I didn't care about the country club or the debutante balls my mother tried to force me into. By the time I was 22, the narrative was set. Lucas was the success, and I was the project. Elena is still finding herself. My mother would sigh to her friends over brunch, lowering her voice. See, as if I had a terminal illness. She's artistic. When I started Lumina 5 years ago, I made a conscious choice to keep it separate from them. At first, it was out of fear of failure. I didn't want them to have more ammunition to mock me if it crashed and burned. But as the company grew, as I secured my first round of funding from a Tier 1 VC firm in Silicon Valley, all handled remotely, all under the radar. The secrecy became a shield. I knew my parents. I knew that if they smelled money, the indifference would vanish. Suddenly, they would be so proud. Suddenly, my father would want to be on the board. Suddenly, my mother would be managing my public image. I couldn't let them touch it. Lumina was mine. But despite knowing who they were, I still tried. I showed up to every birthday, every holiday. I bought them thoughtful gifts that they glanced at and set aside. I listened to my father lecture me on fiscal responsibility while I was managing a company with 40 remote employees and a burn rate of $20,000 a month. And then there was the antagonist in the shadows, Lucas. My brother wasn't just the golden child, he was the poison in the well. He was the one who whispered in their ears. Elena's looking rough, he'd say at Thanksgiving, pouring himself a glass of wine. I think she's asking for money again. You guys need to be firm with her. Tough love, right? He worked in wealth management, a glorified salesman for a firm that preyed on people like my parents, people who had money but no sense. He knew exactly how to push their buttons. He was the one who had convinced them that my lifestyle was an embarrassment. I found out later, through a mutual acquaintance, that Lucas had been explicitly campaigning to get me uninvited from the anniversary party. She'll bring down the vibe, he had told my mother. I'm trying to close a deal with the Sterling family at the party. If they see Elena moping around in some rag, looking like she's on welfare, it makes us look unstable. We need to project power, Mom. Lucas, the man who leased a Porsche he couldn't afford. The man who had borrowed 10 grand from me 3 years ago and never paid it back. A loan I never told our parents about because I didn't want to embarrass him. He was the one orchestrating this. He wanted the stage to himself. He wanted to be the sole heir to the Vance social legacy. I looked at the clock. It was Friday night. The party was in 24 hours. My phone buzzed again. It was a notification from the Bloomberg app. Breaking news, tech world buzzing with rumors of massive Lumina acquisition. Announcement expected tomorrow. I smiled. It was a cold, jagged smile that didn't reach my eyes. Lucas wanted to project power. He wanted to ensure only high society guests were in attendance. He was about to get exactly what he wanted. The most high society woman in the state was going to be the main topic of conversation. She just wouldn't be in the room to save him when the truth came out. Saturday morning arrived with a gray, oppressive stillness that matched the knot in my stomach. The anniversary gala was 12 hours away. My parents and Lucas were likely already at the venue, terrorizing the caterers and ensuring the floral arrangements were aggressive enough to intimidate their guests. I sat at my desk, the glow of my 3 monitors illuminating the dark circles under my eyes. I had slept for maybe 2 hours, tossing and turning as the reality of my exclusion settled into my bones like lead. But with the sunrise came a shift. The sorrow was calcifying into something colder, harder. It was the engineer in me taking over, the part of my brain that solved problems not by weeping over them, but by taking them apart, component by component, until the flaw was exposed. If they were so terrified of me damaging their image, I needed to understand exactly what image they were trying to protect. My father's consultancy firm, Vance and Associates, had always been projected as a pillar of stability. We lived in the right neighborhood, drove the right cars, and vacations were always documented on social media. But I knew better. I knew the specific cadence of my mother's voice when she was trying to charm a creditor over the phone. I knew the way my father sweated when the mail arrived. "Let's see what you're hiding," I whispered, my fingers hovering over the mechanical keyboard. I didn't need to hack anything illegal. I was a data architect. I knew how to find information that was publicly available but buried deep in the digital sediment. I started with the county clerk's records for the house. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the first crack in the facade. There were 3 liens against the property. Not one, which might be a renovation loan, but 3 separate claims totaling nearly $2 million. The most recent one was dated 6 months ago, a high-interest, private lender loan. The kind you only take when the banks have already laughed you out of the room. My heart hammered against my ribs. They were underwater, deep underwater. I moved to the business records. Vance and Associates had reported a net loss for the last 4 consecutive quarters. The investors, they were so desperate to impress tonight, weren't looking to expand the business. They were likely the sharks circling the water, waiting to see if there was any meat left on the bone. "Why the party then?" I asked the screen. "If you're drowning, why spend 50 grand on a gala?" Then I pulled up the public trading disclosures. My brother, Lucas, worked for a firm that handled my parents' retirement accounts. I had always assumed he was managing them well. He was the finance guy, after all. I cross-referenced the dates of the loans with Lucas's trading activity. It was a mess of aggressive, high-risk options trading. The kind of gambling that looks like genius when the market is up and looks like criminal negligence when it's down. And then I saw it. A series of transfers from my parents' joint account to a holding company I didn't recognize. Apex Ventures, LLC. I ran a search on the LLC. It was registered to a residential address. I pulled up the street view. It was Lucas's apartment complex. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp hiss. Lucas wasn't just managing their money. He was siphoning it. He was bleeding them dry to cover his own trading losses, likely telling them it was market volatility or strategic reallocation. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a sickening click. The party wasn't a celebration. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to project wealth to secure a bailout or a merger before the house of cards collapsed. And I, the struggling, poorly dressed daughter, was a visual reminder of failure. I was the risk factor they couldn't afford. Lucas had pushed me out not just because he was embarrassed, but because he was terrified I might ask the wrong question in front of the wrong person. I wasn't just a daughter they were ashamed of. I was the only person smart enough to see the crime being committed in plain sight. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady now. The trembling was gone. I dialed the number for Marcus, my chief legal counsel, and the only person in the physical world who knew the full extent of the Lumina deal. "Elena," his voice was rough with sleep. It was 7:00 a.m. on a Saturday. "Change of plans for the announcement, Marcus," I said, my voice flat and clinical. "The embargo lifts at 6:00 p.m. We're all set for the press release to go out on the wire. Did you want to delay?" "No," I said, staring at the screen where Lucas's fraudulent LLC registration stared back at me. "I want to accelerate the personal angle. I want you to leak the exclusive to CNBC's primetime slot. Tell them they get the first on-air interview request if they run the segment at 6:05 p.m. sharp. And make sure they have the new headshot, the one where I look like I own the place." "Elena, that's aggressive. You usually hate the spotlight." "I do," I replied, closing the tab on my brother's crimes. "But I realized something today, Marcus. If you stay in the dark too long, people start to think you don't exist. I need to remind everyone that I'm very, very real." Understood, I'll make the call. I hung up. The trap was set. I wasn't going to the party. I didn't need to. I was going to be the biggest thing in the room, whether they liked it or not. 6:00 p.m. I sat on my worn-out beige sofa, a glass of cheap wine in my hand, a final toast to the old Alina. On the center monitor, I had the live stream of the Business Daily Special Report. On the right monitor, I had a real-time feed of social media mentions for Lumina. The room was silent, save for the hum of the computer fans, but inside my head it was a cacophony. I imagined the grand ballroom, the clinking of crystal glasses, the forced laughter. My mother in her shimmering silver gown, clutching my father's arm, smiling until her cheeks hurt. Lucas working the room, shaking hands with men he was actively defrauding. On the screen, the anchor, a sharp-faced woman named Diane, turned to the camera. The breaking news graphic flashed in urgent red. In a stunning development in the tech world, Diane began, her voice practiced and grave. The mystery behind the year's largest acquisition has finally been solved. Lumina Technologies, the compression giant that has baffled Silicon Valley with its anonymity, has been acquired by the Apex Group for a staggering $1.2 billion. I took a sip of wine. The number looked surreal on the ticker at the bottom of the screen. For years, the industry has speculated on the identity of the founder, known only as E.V. Vance. Tonight, we can exclusively reveal that the genius behind the code is 29-year-old Alina Vance. My picture filled the screen. It was the professional portrait I had taken 3 days ago. In it, I wasn't the girl in the oversized sweatshirt. I was wearing a tailored black blazer, my hair slicked back, my gaze direct and piercing. I looked powerful. I looked like a threat. Sources close to the deal say Vance programmed the core algorithm entirely from her apartment, bootstrapping the company without initial venture capital to maintain total control. This acquisition makes her one of the youngest self-made female billionaires in the country. I watched the social media feed on the right monitor. It went from a trickle to a waterfall in seconds. Lumina Alina Vance billionaire. Wait, isn't she related to Richard Vance? I went to high school with her. She was the quiet girl. And then the phone on my desk lit up. It wasn't my parents. They were likely on stage or stuck in a conversation they couldn't escape. It was Lucas. I let it ring 3 times. The sound was satisfying, like a bell signaling the start of a round. I picked up on the 4th ring. Hello, my voice was calm, bored even. Alina, Lucas sounded breathless. I could hear the ambient noise of the party in the background, the murmur of 100 voices, the clinking of silverware, the faint strain of a cello. He was likely hiding in a corridor or a restroom. Alina, what the hell is going on? You'll have to be more specific, Lucas. I'm having a quiet night in, as requested. Don't play dumb, he hissed, his voice cracking. The TV's at the bar. Everyone is looking at their phones. Mr. Sterling just asked Dad if it was true. Dad didn't even know what he was talking about until someone showed him the broadcast. Is it true? Did you sell a company for $1 billion? 1.2, I corrected gently. But after taxes, who's counting? Why didn't you say anything? He was panicking now. The aggression was there, but it was brittle, overlaying a deep, terrified tremor. We could have structured this. I could have helped you manage the portfolio. Do you have any idea how bad this looks? You're not here. People are asking where you are. I believe the text said, only high society guests will be there. I quoted, my memory for their insults perfect. I didn't want to embarrass you, Lucas. My lifestyle is so casual. Alina, stop it. You need to get here. Now, Dad is freaking out. Mom is hyperventilating in the green room. If you come now, we can spin this. We can say it was a surprise reveal planned for the anniversary. We can save the night. Save the night? I laughed, a harsh sound that felt foreign in my throat. I'm not interested in saving your night, Lucas. I'm interested in the truth. And frankly, I think the guests are confused. They're realizing that the only person in the family with actual assets was the one you kicked out. We didn't kick you out, he lied, the desperation rising. We made a suggestion. Look, we're family, we need to stick together. You have no idea the pressure we're under. Dad's firm. I know about the firm, Lucas. I cut him off. The line went dead silent. The background noise of the party seemed to swell. I know about the 3 liens on the house. I know about the negative cash flow. And I know about Apex Ventures LLC. His breathing hitched. It was a small sound, but it betrayed everything. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, I said, leaning back in my chair, feeling the power shift entirely to my side of the line. I think you know exactly why you didn't want me there. You didn't want me asking why Mom and Dad are broke, did you? You needed to keep the failure away so the golden boy could keep skimming off the top. You listen to me, he snarled, the mask slipping completely. You keep your mouth shut. You don't know how this works, you're just a coder. You don't understand finance. I understand math, Lucas, and your numbers don't add up. If you say a word to them. Or what? I asked softly. You'll uninvite me. I hung up the phone. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally saying it out loud. The bridge wasn't just burned, I had detonated the pillars. 5 minutes later, the onslaught began. My phone, which I had set back on the desk, began to vibrate continuously. It was a physical manifestation of the panic sweeping through the grand ballroom. Mother, 12 missed calls. Father, 8 missed calls. Mother text. Elena, pick up the phone immediately. This is a misunderstanding. We are so proud of you. Please come to the hotel. We are holding the cake cutting for you. Father text. We need to talk. Now, there are tax implications we need to discuss before you sign anything. Don't speak to the press. They were scrambling. They weren't calling to congratulate me, they were calling to secure the asset. They were calling because the high society guests, the sharks, were smelling blood in the water. I watched the social media feed. Photos from inside the party were starting to leak. One showed my father standing by the podium, looking pale and sweaty, clutching a glass of champagne like a lifeline. The caption read, Vance anniversary awkward vibes. Everyone talking about the billionaire daughter who isn't here. Parents look shook. Another post, from a local tech journalist who had evidently crashed the party or been a plus one, just asked Richard Vance about the Lumina deal. He claimed he advised on the early stages. Does anyone know if this is true? Lucas was trying to control the narrative. He was lying to cover his tracks, trying to claim credit for my success to buoy his own failing reputation. I couldn't let that stand. If I let him paint himself as my advisor, he would use that legitimacy to defraud more people, to secure more loans, to dig the hole deeper for my parents. I needed to escalate. I needed to show them the proof in a way they couldn't ignore, couldn't spin, and couldn't hide from. I opened my secure email client. I had prepared a PDF document earlier that morning. It was a simple, 3-page summary. Page 1, the foreclosure notice drafted for my parents' home, which hadn't been served yet but was in the filing system. Page 2, a transaction log showing the $200,000 transfer from my father's retirement account to Lucas's personal crypto wallet, labeled consulting fees. Page 3, a side-by-side comparison of Lucas's trading performance versus the S&P 500. He was down 45%, while the market was up 10%. I attached the file. Subject, the truth about the finances. I added my father's email address, then my mother's. And then I hesitated. Was this too much? Was this nuclear? I looked at the text message again. Your current lifestyle and presentation would be difficult to explain. They had been willing to throw me away to save face. They were willing to let me believe I was worthless so they could feel superior. And even now, Lucas was lying to them, stealing their future while pretending to protect it. Destroying the lie was the only way to save them from total ruin, even if they hated me for it. I added one more recipient to the BCC line, the family attorney, Mr. Henderson, who I knew was at the party. He was an honest man, an old friend of my grandfather, S. If he saw this, he would have a legal obligation to act. I hit send. Almost instantly, the dynamic changed. I imagined the notification pinging on my father's phone in his pocket. I imagined Mr. Henderson checking his BlackBerry between courses. My phone rang again. It was my mother. I finally answered. Elena, her voice was a shriek, stripped of all its usual polished veneer. Where are you? Do you have any idea what you've done? Mrs. Calloway just asked me why you weren't seated at the head table. She thinks we're estranged. We are, aren't we? I said calmly. You made that very clear in your text. That was for the party logistics. Elena, please, you have to come down here. Lucas says he can fix this. He says he can issue a statement that we're a silent partner. Mom, I cut in, check your email. What? I don't care about email. I care about the fact that half the room is leaving because they think we snubbed the biggest news story of the year. Check your email. Hold on, Richard, check your phone. She sent an email. I heard the fumbling sounds on the other end, the muffled cursing of my father. What is this? My father's voice came through the background, faint but distinct. Foreclosure, what the hell is this? Keep reading, Dad, I said to the open line. Transfer to Apex Ventures. My father's voice dropped, losing its anger and replaced by pure confusion. Lucas, what is this? Why is there a transfer from the retirement fund? I heard Lucas's voice then, high-pitched and defensive. That's a fabrication. She forged it. She's jealous, Dad. She's trying to ruin me because I'm successful. It's not a forgery, Richard, I said, loud enough for the phone to pick it up. Mr. Henderson has the same document. Ask him to verify the transaction ID. Lucas, my mother's voice was trembling. Lucas, why is your name on this account? Give me the phone, Lucas screamed. There was a scuffle, the sound of the phone dropping. Then the line went dead. I stared at the disconnected call. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was the aftershock of the explosion. The bomb had gone off. The party was over. The high society guests were about to witness something far more entertaining than a string quartet. They were about to watch the golden child crumble. I didn't hang up the phone and go back to my wine. I couldn't. The silence in my apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I had dropped a bomb on my family, and while part of me wanted to watch the fallout from a safe distance, the engineer in me knew that explosions were unpredictable. If I wasn't there to counter. All the blast radius, Lucas, the master manipulator, might find a way to spin even this. He might claim I hacked the accounts. He might claim I was mentally unstable. He might convince my desperate parents that the only way to save face was to denounce me publicly, even as the truth stared them in the face. I had to be the one to finish it. I stood up and walked to my closet. I bypassed the casual clothes that had been the subject of so much derision and pulled out the suit I had worn for the magazine shoot. It was a sharp, architectural black blazer with satin lapels and matching trousers that fit like a second skin. I pulled my hair back into a severe, elegant chignon and applied a coat of dark red lipstick. I wasn't dressing for a party. I was dressing for a hostile takeover. The drive to the hotel took 20 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my battered sedan, the one I kept because it was reliable, not flashy, until my knuckles turned white. When I pulled up to the valet stand at the Grand Historic Hotel, the attendant looked at the car with a sneer, then at me. His expression faltered when he saw the look in my eyes. "Keep it close," I said, handing him a $20 bill. "I won't be staying long." The lobby was a cavern of marble and gold leaf, echoing with the distant sounds of the gala. I could hear the murmur of the crowd even before I reached the double mahogany doors of the ballroom. Security was tight, a testament to the high society guest list my parents had curated. A large man in a suit stepped in front of me, a clipboard in hand. "Name?" he asked, his tone bored. "Elena Vance," I said. He scanned the list, he frowned. He scanned it again. "I'm afraid you're not on the list, Ms. Vance," he said, looking up with a practiced, condescending smile. "This is a private event, strictly invitation only." "Check the VIP addendum," I lied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. "There is no." "Check the news," I interrupted, my voice low and dangerous. "And then ask yourself if you want to be the person who denied entry to the woman who just bought the internet." He blinked. He looked at me, really looked at me, and recognition dawned. He had seen the broadcast. He stepped back, unhooking the velvet rope with a fumble of fingers. "Right this way, Ms. Vance. Apologies." I pushed the doors open. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over the room. But the atmosphere was wrong. It wasn't festive. It was tense. The string quartet was playing a frantic version of Vivaldi, trying to cover the sound of 100 hushed conversations. Heads turned as I entered. It started as a ripple near the door and spread outward like a wave. The whispers grew louder. "That's her. Is that the daughter? She looks different. That suit costs more than my car." I didn't look at them. I locked my eyes on the head table at the far end of the room. It was a tableau of disaster. My mother was seated, her face buried in a napkin, her shoulders shaking. My father was standing, red-faced, arguing with a man in a tuxedo, Mr. Henderson, the lawyer. And Lucas was pacing, his arms waving wildly, gesturing at a phone he held in a death grip. I walked down the center aisle. The crowd parted for me. I felt like Moses parting the Red Sea, but instead of water, I was pushing through a wall of judgment and sudden, desperate curiosity. Lucas saw me first. He froze mid-gesture. His face, usually so composed and handsome, was twisted into a mask of pure panic. "You," he shouted, his voice cracking, silencing the few remaining conversations. "You have some nerve showing up here, after what you did." The music stopped. The quartet lowered their bows. The room went dead silent. "Hello, Lucas," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the ballroom, it carried to the rafters. "Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad." "Get her out of here," Lucas yelled, turning to the security guards who were hovering uncertainly at the edges of the room. "She's trespassing. She's harassing us. She hacked my accounts." My father looked up. He looked aged, 10 years older than he had that morning. He looked from Lucas to me, his eyes wide and bewildered. "Elena," he whispered, "is it true, the email?" "It's true, Dad," I said, stopping 10 feet from the table. "All of it." "She's lying," Lucas screamed, stepping toward me. He looked unhinged, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's jealous because I'm the one who takes care of this family. I'm the one who manages the money. She's just a failed writer living in a box." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time, born of the absurdity of his delusion. "A failed writer?" I repeated. I turned to the room, addressing the high society guests directly. "My brother seems to be under the impression that success is defined by the car you lease or the parties you throw." I turned back to Lucas. "I didn't hack your accounts, Lucas. I audited them, public records, transaction logs. The blockchain doesn't lie, even if you do." "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know that you leveraged the house 3 times, I said, ticking the points off on my fingers. "I know you shorted the market with Dad's retirement fund and lost 40% in 2 weeks. I know that Apex Ventures is a shell company registered to your apartment, used to siphon consulting fees for work you never did." The crowd gasped. I heard the word fraud whispered somewhere to my left. "That's technical," Lucas sputtered. It's complex financial strategy you wouldn't understand." Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, stepped forward. He held up his phone. "Actually, Lucas," he said, his voice grave, "I just verified the transaction IDs Elena sent. The money didn't go to any market positions. It went to a private account in the Caymans. And then it was used to pay off gambling debts." My mother looked up from her napkin. Her mascara was running, staining her cheeks black. Gambling, she whispered. Lucas, you said the market was just volatile. It was, Lucas pleaded, turning to her. Mom, don't listen to them. I can fix it. I just need time. If we get the loan from the Sterlings tonight. There is no loan, a deep voice boomed from the crowd. Mr. Sterling, the venture capitalist my father had been desperate to impress, stepped out from a group of onlookers. He was a formidable man, and he looked furious. I don't do business with embezzlers, Sterling said, glaring at Lucas. Then he turned to me, his expression softening into respect. But I do business with innovators. Ms. Vance, or should I say, Evie? Elena is fine, I said. That algorithm of yours, Sterling said, ignoring my parents completely. It's brilliant. I've been trying to get a meeting with you for 6 months. I've been busy, I said, building a billion-dollar company. The weight of those words settled over the room. My parents stared at me. For the first time in my life, I saw them truly see me, not as the disappointment, not as the project, but as a titan. Lucas looked around the room, realizing the ground had shifted. His allies were gone. His charm had evaporated. He was standing alone on the precipice. You think you're so special, Lucas sneered, his voice low and venomous, a last-ditch attempt to hurt me. But you're still alone, Elena. Mom and Dad didn't want you here. Remember that? They chose me. They chose a lie, I said softly, and I'm not alone, Lucas. I pointed to the screen that had been set up for the anniversary slideshow. Someone, perhaps a helpful technician who had been following the news, had switched the input. It was displaying the live feed of the Lumina acquisition. I have the truth, I said. And as of tonight, I have the resources to ensure you never steal another dime from anyone in this room. I turned to my parents. I suggest you check your homeowner's insurance policy. I believe it has a clause about theft by a family member. You're going to need it. And with that, I turned on my heel. I didn't wait for the applause or the apologies or the tears. I walked back down the aisle, head high, leaving the ruins of their perfect anniversary behind me. The fallout was swift and brutal, exactly as I had calculated. By Monday morning, Lucas was in custody. Mr. Henderson hadn't wasted a second. Once the evidence of the wire fraud was undeniable, he had filed a report with the SEC and the local district attorney. It turned out my parents weren't his only victims. Lucas had been managing the portfolios of 3 other families in their social circle. The high society guests he had been so desperate to impress were the ones who signed the witness statements against him. I didn't visit him. I didn't pay his bail. For the first time in my life, I let him face the consequences of his own actions without offering myself as a buffer. 3 weeks later, I was back in my apartment. The boxes were finally packed, but this time, they were being moved by a professional crew to a penthouse downtown, a place with a view of the skyline and enough security to keep the paparazzi at bay. The doorbell rang. I checked the monitor. It was my parents. They looked smaller than I remembered. My father was wearing a cardigan instead of a suit, and he looked frail. My mother was wearing no makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple clip. They looked like ordinary, defeated people. I buzzed them in. They stood in my hallway, looking around at the stacks of boxes, the high-end computer equipment, the life I had built without them. Elena, my father started, his voice thick with emotion. He held his hat in his hands, twisting the brim. We didn't know if you'd see us. I have 10 minutes before my legal team arrives, I said, leaning against the doorframe. I didn't owe. F for them, T. I didn't invite them to sit. We wanted to apologize, my mother said. Her eyes were red-rimmed. We had no idea, Elena, about Lucas, about you. You had no idea because you didn't want to know, I said, my voice steady. You looked at me and saw a failure because it made Lucas look like a success by comparison. It was easier for you to believe I was useless than to admit your golden child was a fraud. We were wrong, my father admitted, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. We were so wrong, we've lost the house. The bank is foreclosing next week. The lawyers say They say we're liable for some of Lucas's debts because we signed the joint accounts. They stood there, the unspoken request hanging in the air. Save us. I looked at them. I felt a pang of pity, yes. They were my parents. But the anger was gone, replaced by a dull, aching clarity. I bought the house, I said. Their heads snapped up. Hope, bright and desperate, flooded their faces. You did, my mother gasped. Oh, Alina, thank you, we knew you. I bought the debt, I corrected. The bank owns nothing, I own the mortgage. I walked over to the desk and picked up a folder. I handed it to my father. This is a lease agreement, I said. You can stay in the house, I won't evict you. The rent is set at $0 a month. Alina, that's incredibly generous, my father stammered. However, I continued, my voice hardening, there are conditions. First, Lucas is never allowed on the property. Not for a holiday, not for a visit, not for a minute. If he sets foot on the driveway, the lease is void, and you will be evicted immediately. My mother flinched, but she nodded. He ruined us. We know that now. Second, I said, you will not speak to the press about me. You will not give interviews about how you raised a billionaire. You will not take credit for my work. If anyone asks, you will say that I am an independent woman who made her own way. We understand, my father said softly. And third, I said, looking them both in the eye, don't expect me to come to the next party. I think I prefer my own company. They stood there for a long moment, processing the shift in power. They had raised me to be obedient, to be quiet, to be the background noise to their lives. Instead, I had become the landlord of their reality. We love you, Alina, my mother said, her voice trembling. We really do. I know, I said, and I believed her. They loved me in their own limited, flawed way, but I also knew that love shouldn't hurt this much. Goodbye, Mom, Dad. They left, walking slowly down the hallway, clutching the lease agreement like a lifeline. I closed the door and locked it. I turned back to my empty apartment. The sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I wasn't the girl who waited by the phone anymore. I wasn't the daughter who needed their approval to feel whole. I was Alina Vance. I had built a kingdom out of code and silence. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my new VP of Operations. Meeting in 10, you ready to change the world? I smiled, picking up my bag. I already have, I typed back. I walked out the door, into the bright, blinding light of my own future, and I didn't look back.